You have to go home now, she said gently. Your wife will be worried about you. Charles laughed bitterly. She doesn't care, he said. She never cared. Sandra watched him in silence, not knowing what to say. Once upon a time, in a busy city in Nigeria, there lived a young woman named Sandra Obidike. She was 24 years old, full of life, and had just completed her university education. After finishing her youth service, she was lucky to secure a job as a secretary in Charles Williams' firm. Sandra was a beautiful Igbo girl from Enugu State. Her dark skin shone like polished ebony, and she was tall with a pointed nose and full lips. She carried herself with grace, and her intelligence made her stand out among other of her colleagues. Charles Williams was the owner of the firm where Sandra worked. He was a man of wealth and power, married to a woman named Veronica. Charles and Veronica had been married for several years, but their marriage was not a happy one. There were constant quarrels, misunderstandings, and endless complaints from Veronica. Charles was tired of his wife's nagging, and instead of going home after work, he often stayed back in his office, drowning himself in alcohol. Sandra had been working at the firm for a few months when everything changed. It was a Friday evening, and the office was almost empty. Most of the workers had gone home, but Charles was still in his office. Sandra had finished her task for the day, but she stayed behind to assist her boss. When she entered his office, she noticed a glass of wine on his table. Charles looked tired and deep in thought. Sir, it's already getting late, Sandra said softly. Charles lifted his head and looked at her. You can go, he replied. Sandra hesitated. She could see that something was wrong. Her eyes fell on the bottle of the alcohol behind him. Have you been drinking, sir? She asked. Charles let out a sad chuckle. Yes, I have been drinking. I just want to forget my worries, he said. Sandra felt sorry for him. She walked over to his table, took the glass and the bottle from his hand, and placed them on the other side of the table. You have to go home now, she said gently. Your wife will be worried about you. Charles laughed bitterly. She doesn't care, he said. She never cared. Sandra watched him in silence, not knowing what to say. She reached out to help him, and as she did, their hands accidentally touched. Charles looked into her eyes, and for the first time, Sandra felt nervous. Do you know that you're beautiful? Charles said in a low voice. His eyes were fixed with emotions, but he was clearly drunk. Sandra swallowed hard. Sir, you need to go home, she whispered. I want to kiss you, Charles said suddenly. Please, just once. Let's forget my sorrows. Sandra's heart pounded in her chest. She stepped back, feeling scared and unsure. Sir, you are drunk, she said quickly. But not too drunk to notice how beautiful you are, Charles replied. Before she could react, he leaned in and kissed her. Sandra froze. She knew it was wrong, but for some reason, she couldn't push him away. Sir, please don't do that, she finally managed to say. Charles sighed. I wish I had met you before her, he murmured. Sandra was trembling. Sir, you are drunk, she repeated. But Charles kissed her again, and that was it. Sandra couldn't resist. She didn't understand why she gave in so easily. It just happened. From that night, everything changed. Sandra and Charles became secret lovers. He would call her late at night, take her out to expensive places, and shower her with gifts. He always told her that he had been planning to divorce his wife for over a year, but he never took any action. Sandra believed in his promises. She believed that one day he would leave his wife and be with her. But months passed and nothing changed. Then one day, Sandra discovered she was pregnant. At first, she was scared, but then she thought about it carefully. This could be the perfect opportunity for Charles to make their relationship public. If he truly loved her, he would take responsibility and be with her. But when she told Charles about the pregnancy, everything fell apart. "You will get rid of that thing in your stomach," Charles said coldly. Sandra felt like the ground had opened beneath her feet. The words kept ringing in her ears. Was I being played? Did he ever love me? Was I used? The thoughts tormented her daily, and she couldn't believe that the man who once called her his queen now wanted her to destroy the life growing inside her. But Sandra was not ready to give up. She had to find a way to be in Charles's life again. That evening, Charles came home late, as usual. He was drunk. As he staggered into the house, his wife Veronica stood in the living room watching him. "You didn't tell me you had married a new wife," Veronica said, her voice calm. Sandra was sitting on the next couch. She had already told Veronica everything that had happened. Veronica turned to Sandra and gave a small smile. "Make yourself comfortable," she said. "As you can see, our husband is drunk for the night. There is food in the kitchen in case you are hungry. Tomorrow, we will discuss this properly. Use the bedroom by the left." Then she walked away, leaving Sandra in shock. Sandra was scared when her boss's wife accepted her that easily and even told her to sleep over. All she had in mind was to tell the wife what her husband had done. She did not plan on sleeping there. When Charles heard the news that his secretary was pregnant for him, he went to his usual joint. He did not know if he was drinking to celebrate or drinking because he knew that was the end of his career if his wife found out, or so he thought. For 7 years since he had been married, he had no child, and his wife was okay with it. She did not want a baby. She did not want to lose her shape, not to talk of her smooth skin and firm body. She wanted everything to remain the same. Even when Charles complained that he needed a child, Veronica refused to listen. She wanted to keep her body the way it was. This made Charles really worried. Many times, they quarreled over it. That was the reason why he stayed late at the office that day. The first day he slept with Sandra, and often to forget about his wife's decision. He drank, but there was another problem. His wife owned the company he worked for. He did not want to leave the marriage. Where would he start from? What would he do? But at the same time, he did not want an adopted child. When Sandra told him she was pregnant, he did not know if he should be happy or sad. How would his wife take it? He did not want to lose what he had built with his wife. He loved her and did not want to hurt her. The only thing that came to his mind was to end the pregnancy, even after making up his mind and paying Sandra for it. He still had to go to his usual joint to drink away his sorrows. It was a hard decision. That night, when Charles came home drunk and Veronica told Sandra to use the bedroom on the left, Sandra became more scared. She had no intention of sleeping over. She kept thinking, why is my boss's wife treating me so nicely? Does she have plans to harm me while I'm sleeping? She looked at the time. It was 10:57 p.m. It was too late and too risky for her to go home. Her house was far. She thought about what to do. Living was dangerous, but sleeping there also felt risky. She decided to take the lesser risk. She would stay. At least her roommate knew where she was in case anything happened. She called Lucy, her roommate, and told her she would not be coming home. That night was long. She could not sleep. Any small sound made her jump. Many thoughts ran through her mind. At one point, She filled a bucket with water and placed her legs inside to keep herself from falling asleep completely. Morning finally came. Veronica entered Sandra's room. "Are you awake?" Veronica asked. Sandra nodded. Her eyes were swollen from lack of sleep. Veronica noticed the bucket of water next to her. "Do you sleep at all?" Veronica asked. Sandra was quiet. "Were you scared that I would harm you?" Veronica asked again. Sandra did not reply, but her face showed the answer. "Come on, why would I harm you? I was the one who told you to stay here. You are pregnant and need rest. You are like family to us now. Don't be scared," Veronica said. Sandra nodded. "Charles will join us soon. He's taking his birth. Do you want me to get you something for breakfast, or will you help yourself in the kitchen?" Veronica asked as she turned to leave. "I will prepare something for myself," Sandra replied. She was still afraid. She did not trust the sudden kindness from Veronica. Something was definitely wrong. Minutes after Veronica left, Sandra went to the kitchen. She made breakfast and ate. Before she finished eating, Charles was already dressed for work. Veronica and Sandra were seated in the living room when Charles rushed out, ready to leave. Veronica stopped him. "Wait," she said. "We have something to discuss." Sandra was holding a cup of tea, sipping it slowly because it was hot. Charles turned to face them. He was shocked to see Sandra still in the house. He had not expected it. Sandra saw the surprise on his face. Veronica, on the other hand, was smiling. "This is what you have always wanted, babe. Your blood. A child with your blood. So Sandra, I and my husband have decided to buy the baby after you give birth," Veronica said, still smiling as she held Charles's hand. Sandra's eyes widened. "Excuse me?" she shouted. She quickly removed the cup from her mouth and started coughing. She was in shock. She had not expected that. Sandra was so shocked, as she didn't expect those words from her boss's wife. How could she even come up with that idea? Charles had to tell his wife to meet him in the bedroom. He also wasn't expecting his wife to come up with the idea of buying another woman's child. Veronica walked into the bedroom, her face calm like she had done nothing unusual. Charles shut the door behind her and turned to face her. His mind was restless. He had spent all night thinking about the situation, and now Veronica was making things worse. "Veronica, what was that for?" Charles asked his wife. "What do you mean?" Veronica asked him. "You want to buy another woman's child?" Charles asked her, still surprised. "But the baby is also your child, your blood. That is what you have always wanted," Veronica told Charles. "I wanted a baby from you, my wife, not from another woman. I want our family to be the perfect family," Charles said, trying to hold Veronica. "We are perfect, Charles. I just can't go through the pain of childbirth," Veronica said. "And I have suggested IVF, vitro fertilization, for you," Charles replied. "And I suggested another alternative like adoption." Veronica replied, "You know I don't want an adopted baby. I want a baby from you, my wife," Charles said. "I don't think I can love an adopted baby. Why don't you want a baby? Our own baby from your womb, a flesh of your flesh," Charles asked Veronica, confused. Years before Charles got married to Veronica, their relationship was so perfect. They met during their youth service year. Veronica was the only child and daughter of her parents. She was Veronica Williams. Chief Williams was one of the wealthiest men in the city, and all he ever wished for was for the man who would marry his daughter to be willing to take up his last name, Williams. And that was when Charles came in. Without thinking twice, he agreed to marry her and took the last name of Chief Williams. Veronica's mother was late, so Chief Williams treated his only daughter like an egg. When Charles was dating Veronica, she would always tell him how she didn't want to give birth, that she couldn't stand it. He thought it was a phase and that she was going to pass that phase eventually when they got married. But she didn't. Charles was one of those prodigal sons who left home at an early age and never looked back to return. His father was a very hard and strict man on him, and Charles took it as maltreatment. At some point, he realized that he was an adopted child. It broke him down really bad. That was after his parents gave birth to another baby. When he had the opportunity to go to another city with his friend while he was still in SS2, he found the courage and left home. He didn't say a word to his parents, and it had been 15 years. He didn't know if his parents were still alive or dead. When he met Veronica in the camp, he thought he would be able to love someone again. He already imagined a beautiful love story with her, but it seemed the reverse was the case. What if she doesn't accept? Have you thought of how she would take the whole thing? Who would even want to sell their baby? Charles asked Veronica restlessly. Leave that to me. Let's go back to the living room, Veronica said, and they both went back to the living room. Charles really didn't buy the idea of asking Sandra to sell their baby to them. Was Veronica going to love the baby? The baby wasn't her blood. How was she going to do it? Wait, is she going to kill the baby after birth just to break me down? Was this all some sort of evil agreement? There were many thoughts running through Charles's mind. He didn't want the child to suffer or be maltreated the way his parents treated him, but he couldn't do or say anything. He was scared of starting afresh, leaving all he built with Veronica. Where would he start from if Veronica eventually sent him packing? So he had to play along. Sandra was still sitting in the parlor, waiting for them. So the deal is that you will stay with us till you give birth, Veronica told Sandra immediately after she came to the living room and sat down. What if I don't accept your offer? Sandra asked immediately. Then why did you come to my house? Why did you come to tell me that you were pregnant? For my husband to marry you? Like marry you for real? Veronica thundered. I just thought that you should know, Sandra said. And now I know. And we have taken our decision, Veronica said. Right, baby? Veronica said and smiled, holding Charles's hand. Charles nodded. Yes. Maybe this was really a bad idea, me coming here in the first place. I would just take my leave, she said. She didn't even take her bath in the house. She quickly went into the bedroom she slept in the previous night, changed into her dress, took her bag, and headed to the front door. But immediately after she was opening the front door, the guard outside the door brought her back in the living room. I want to go home, Sandra said. You came to me to tell me that you were pregnant for my husband, and I accepted you. And now I appreciate you coming to me. 10 million naira for you to have the baby for me under my roof, under my watch, and after having the baby, you walk away like nothing ever happened. And this isn't me pleading. You either take the offer or leave it. But you are having the baby under my roof, Veronica said as she switched from a smiling to a serious face. Sandra became really scared and was looking at Charles, who couldn't do anything to help. What had she gotten herself into? She thought to herself. She reached out to her phone to call her roommate, Lucy, after she entered back into the bedroom given to her to sleep in the house. Veronica entered the room just as she was about to make the call. I'm sorry, you won't be needing any mobile phone till after your delivery, Veronica said and collected her mobile phone. Later that night, Veronica went to Sandra's apartment and paid her roommate Lucy off in exchange for one request that in case anyone asked about Sandra's whereabouts, she should always tell them that Sandra left to meet one of her aunts in another city a day ago. When Veronica went to Sandra's house, she met her roommate, who was also a promising young lady. Lucy was also a beautiful lady. She lived in a self-contained apartment. She was tall and light-skinned, slim. She was wearing her bomb shorts when she heard a knock on the door. Immediately she opened the door. She met Veronica outside. Mind if I come in? Veronica said. I don't know you, Lucy said, still standing at the door, leaving it slightly open. And you would know me if you let me in, Veronica answered. Lucy waited for a couple of minutes, thinking before she finally let Veronica in. They properly exchanged greetings and Lucy offered Veronica a seat to sit down. Immediately Veronica entered the room. She saw the room decorated and Sandra's framed picture was mounted on the wall, with Lucy's own too. Lucy sat waiting to hear what Veronica had to say. Won't you offer me a drink or something? Veronica asked her. What would you want to drink? Lucy asked. Water is okay. Veronica then replied. Lucy brought a glass of chilled water almost immediately. I suppose Miss Sandra Obidike is your friend and roommate, Veronica said after drinking a little of the water. Yes, and you are? Lucy asked. Veronica Williams, wife to Charles Williams of Charles Williams firm, Veronica said. Ma'am, Sandra works for your husband, Lucy said. Exactly, Veronica replied. Did you know where Sandra went to yesterday evening? Veronica asked her. She said she had this urgent meeting with your husband, her boss, that needed urgent attention, Lucy said. Is that all she told you? Veronica asked. Yes, Lucy nodded to yes. Do you know that your roommate is pregnant for my husband? Veronica asked Lucy, looking deep into her eyes. She never told me, Lucy replied. That means she isn't your friend, really? Your roommate has been having an affair with my husband behind my back. She used my inability to give birth. She has been sleeping with my husband. Tears dropped from Veronica's eyes. All we did was offer her a job. Is it a crime to offer a jobless person a job now? Veronica asked Lucy. And she had the nerve to come to my house to tell my husband to marry her. And of course, my husband has agreed to marry her. But I would want you to do me a favor. Veronica paused. Where do Sandra's parents stay? She asked. Her parents are late. They died after she graduated from university in a car accident. She said she has an auntie who never goes to visit her. So it's been me and her, and I'm sorry for the pain she caused you, Lucy said. Veronica removed a check from her purse and gave it to Lucy. This is a check for 5 million naira. In case anyone asks about Sandra's whereabouts, you will tell them Sandra went to visit her auntie in another city, Veronica said. But why would I do that? You just said she's staying with you, Lucy said. Hey, young lady, I want that to be a little secret between us. What would you do when a stranger comes to break your home? Veronica asked Lucy. I would try to fight, Lucy replied. Lucy, you are the only friend Sandra has, right? Veronica asked. Yes, I guess, Lucy replied. I'm a good person. That's why I have come to tell you that your roommate is with me and doing greatly okay. She will come back, but not here. She will go to her auntie's house, apparently. After much talk and negotiation between the two ladies, Lucy finally accepted to go on with Veronica's plan. Veronica dropped the check on the table, stood up and smiled at Lucy. Nice decor you have here, she said as she left the house. Charles went to work that day but couldn't concentrate. Why would Sandra come to my house? Even if she didn't want to abort the child in her womb, she should have waited for me to come up with a plan, he thought to himself. Recently, Charles became a regular customer of the bear parlor. He really wanted to figure out what was in his wife's mind. Was she angry? Was she going to chase him away? Or his life would be a mess. Starting from zero again, starting from scratch. He couldn't even think about it. After having a few drinks, he decided to go home later at night just to ask his wife a few questions. He was mindful of the questions he asked. When he got home, he went straight to their bedroom. Veronica had just finished taking her bath. She was seated next to the big mirror in their bedroom, with only a towel covering her body. She was gently rubbing cream all over her body. What if her family comes looking for her? Charles asked, still being a bit drunk. No one would come for her. She's an orphan. Everything has been sorted out, Veronica said, still rubbing oil cream on her body. What if she reports to the police after she gives birth and we let her go? Telling them we forcefully took her baby or something? Charles asked. But it's your baby, Veronica said. But what if? Charles said. That is why we would kill her after she gives birth, Veronica said, smiling peacefully at the mirror. A cold shoulder went down the drunk self of Charles immediately after Veronica said that. Immediately Veronica made mention of killing Sandra. Charles became really weak. He had to sit down on the bed helplessly. We are not killers. We can't possibly kill her, Charles said as he regained a little strength to talk. Oh, really? So, why can't we kill her? So that you can continue your sexcapade with her? Do you really actually love me as you claimed? Or were you just here for the money? Like hundreds of thousands of other men, did you? Veronica asked as she immediately turned to Charles to notice his reaction. Charles was speechless at that point. He gently stood up from the bed, went to the bathroom, and took a shower. After he was done showering, he tied his white towel and went back to the bedroom. He left the bedroom after putting on his night's pajamas. He didn't say a word to Veronica. By that time, he was already recovering from his drunk self. Charles went into Sandra's bedroom. Sandra was sitting helplessly on the bed. She was crying. Charles knocked on her door and entered. Have you been crying? Charles asked her as he tried to clean up her tears from her eyes with a tissue paper he took from the table beside the bed. Don't touch me, you monster, Sandra said with a shaky voice. You know I didn't mean for any of this to happen, Charles said. This time, his eyes were a bit clear, and he had started regaining from his drunk self. Have you been drinking? Sandra asked as his breath came close to him when he opened his mouth and spoke. A little, Charles replied. He had already taken his bath but forgot to brush his teeth. He still had that bad breath from too much drinking. You know, I really didn't want any of this to happen, Charles said again. You allowed your wife to cage me here like a prisoner, and you are here saying you didn't want any of this to happen, Sandra said. When Charles and Sandra had started dating, it felt like something beautiful, even though it was a secret relationship. Sandra felt safe with Charles. She didn't realize she had fallen this deeply for Charles. Charles would always tell her that he was working on the divorce papers with his lawyer, but everything felt like a lie now. Sandra felt played. She had to keep the relationship a secret. She had regrets now. She didn't even tell her roommate about her affair with her boss. She was ashamed of herself now. Who would come to her rescue? Sandra felt the world crumbling upon her. One time when Sandra was really on Charles's neck, disturbing him about when he would file for the divorce because she wanted to know if she was wasting her time with Charles. But Charles told her that she meant something special to him and she was working on it. Sandra had believed him. She had trusted him with all her heart. Now, she wished she had never met him. She wished she had never fallen in love with him. As she sat on the bed, her mind drifted back to how everything started. She remembered the first day she met Charles. It was her first day at work. She was so excited to start her new job. She had worked so hard to get that job. She wanted to prove herself. She wanted to make something out of her life. Charles was so nice to her from the very first day. He was charming and kind. He made her feel comfortable in the office. He would always check on her to make sure she was doing okay. At first, she thought he was just being a good boss, but as time went on, she started to notice how he looked at her. She tried to ignore it. She told herself it was nothing, but deep down, she knew she was beginning to like him too. One day, Charles invited her out for lunch. She was hesitant at first. She knew it was wrong, but she couldn't resist. She went with him. That lunch date turned into several more dates. Before she knew it, she was deeply involved with him. He told her he was in an unhappy marriage. He told her he was planning to leave his wife. He made her believe that they had no future together. Sandra had believed everything he said. She had given her heart to him. She had loved him with everything she had. Now, here she was, trapped in his house, with his wife threatening to kill her. She felt foolish. She felt used. She wanted to leave. She wanted to run away. But where would she go? She thought of calling someone for help, but who would believe her? She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry, but she knew it wouldn't change anything. She looked at Charles standing there, looking at her with pity in his eyes. She hated him. She hated herself for loving him. She wished she could turn back the hands of time. She wished she had never said yes to him, but it was too late now. She was trapped, and she didn't know if she would ever get out of this alive. One time when Sandra was really on Charles's neck, disturbing him about when he would file for divorce because she wanted to know if she was wasting her time with Charles. He told her that she meant something special to him and that he was working on it. Sandra believed him. She had given her heart to Charles and she trusted his words. He always made her feel special. She remembered the day they went to the hotel where they usually met. That day, Charles met one of his friends there. He told Sandra that the man was his friend and introduced her to him as his wife-to-be. Sandra's heart was filled with joy. She felt important. She felt like the woman Charles truly loved. But was it all a plan? Was she just being used? Many thoughts ran through Sandra's mind. At some point, she started thinking that Charles had been playing her like a piece in a game. But how could that be? They had gone to so many occasions, so many vacations together, just like normal couples. He always assured her that he had no feelings for his wife. He said he only pitied her, and that was the reason he was still with her. He promised Sandra that once he finished his building project, he would divorce his wife. Sandra believed him because she loved him. For over a year, she kept Charles a secret from her friend Lucy. That was how Charles wanted it. Even when Lucy noticed the happiness on Sandra's face, she never said a word. Many times, she wanted to tell Lucy about all the sweet things Charles did for her, but she never did. She loved Charles too much to go against his wish. Then, everything changed. Sandra had gone to Charles's office 2 days ago, excited to tell him the good news. She thought it was good news, but Charles did not see it that way. She told him she was pregnant. Instead of being happy, Charles told her to abort the baby. He did not even take a second to think about it. Sandra was shocked. She did not see it coming. Charles threw money at her as if she was a prostitute. He did not care about how she felt. He did not even think about whether she could die in the process of abortion. Sandra was hurt very deeply. In her pain, without thinking, she went straight to Charles's house and told his wife Veronica that she was pregnant for him. She did not care how Veronica would feel. She was too angry to care. But after she had said it all, she realized she had made a big mistake. Had she gone too far, she wished she could take back her words. But it was too late. She had already said it. The moment the words left her mouth, she saw how broken Veronica was. Later that night, Sandra was in the bedroom alone with Charles. She could not hold back her emotions anymore. She needed answers. She looked at Charles and asked him, "Did you ever love me?" Charles remained silent. Sandra could see guilt written all over his face. She moved closer to him and lifted his face with her hands. With tears in her eyes, she asked again, "Did I really mean something to you, Charles? Was I just a joke to you?" Charles finally spoke. "Yes, I do. I love you. I have always loved you. I am sorry for everything. I am sorry for all I have put you through." For a few seconds, they both remained silent. They stared at each other without saying a word. Then slowly, Charles moved closer to Sandra and kissed her. As he was kissing Sandra, Veronica suddenly opened the door to the bedroom where they were. She stood there watching them. The kiss between Sandra and Charles felt so real that they were locked up in the action. They didn't even notice when Veronica came in. They were still lost in the kiss when the glass of wine in Veronica's hand fell to the ground and broke. That was the moment they unlocked from the kiss. Sandra, as if suddenly waking up from a dream, gave Charles a slap on his cheek. It was as if she had been controlled while kissing Charles, unable to stop herself. But now that they had seen Veronica, the spell was broken. Veronica stood there for a second, her eyes filled with pain and anger. Without saying a word, she turned and walked away. Charles immediately got up from the bed and ran after Veronica, leaving Sandra alone in the room. Sandra sat frozen for a while, her hands shaking. She rubbed her huge stomach gently with her palms, trying to understand what had just happened. Was Charles using some kind of spell on her? She had already suffered so much because of him. So why did she let herself fall into this again? She stood up almost immediately, pacing back and forth in the large bedroom. Her heart pounded as she thought of what Veronica might do next. Would she throw her out? Would she send people to hurt her? Maybe she should run away. But where would she go? The house was heavily guarded. If she tried to escape, she would be caught before she could even reach the gate. She placed her hands on her stomach again. She couldn't take the risk. Besides, she wasn't even allowed to use a mobile phone in this house. She had no way to call for help. She thought about going to Veronica to apologize. But what would she even say? Would Veronica believe her if she said she didn't mean for this to happen? Her life was ruined. She thought she had nowhere to run. Meanwhile, Charles had already reached Veronica in her big matrimonial bedroom. She had changed into her pajamas and was sitting on the bed, deep in thought. Tears filled her eyes, but she tried to hold them back as Charles entered the room. "I knew you have been cheating on me," she finally said, her voice shaking. "Those 1 week business trips you kept taking. I knew they were lies. I knew you were going to meet her. I knew you had been cheating on me for a year, spending my money on another woman, looking me in the eye and lying to me, telling me you loved me." She wiped her face roughly with the back of her hand. But the tears kept falling. "I gave you everything, Charles. You control my company. I gave you everything you ever asked for. Why didn't you just walk away when you couldn't do this thing we call marriage anymore? Instead, you chose to disrespect me by kissing your side chick in my house." Her voice cracked as she spoke. Veronica took a deep breath, trying to stop herself from breaking down completely. "And your side chick even had the nerves to come to my house, carrying her big stomach like a trophy, mocking me, remembering me of my inability to give birth." Charles froze. His face suddenly turned pale. He looked at Veronica in confusion. "What do you mean by inability to give birth?" he asked. Veronica sniffed, her nose running from all the crying. "Yes, Charles," she whispered. "I can't give birth. That's why I never wanted a baby. I am unable to give birth. I have no womb." Her voice was so small, so weak, as if the words were being dragged out of her against her will. Charles just stood there, unable to speak. Veronica let out a deep sigh and continued, "I was scared. I was scared that you wouldn't stay. I was scared that you were going to leave. I had fallen deeply in love with you at the camp. I didn't want to lose you, so I needed a lie to keep you to myself." Tears streamed down her face as she spoke. She couldn't hold them back anymore. "That was really selfish of you. You knew how much I wanted a baby. I wanted to carry a baby in my arms, and you lied to me," Charles said. "I didn't entirely lie. I told you I didn't want a baby, and you agreed." "You agreed," Veronica replied. "I thought you would change your mind. We were still youthful then. I thought when we got married, everything would change, and you would want babies running around this big house," Charles replied. "And I told you we could adopt. I suggested adoption, Veronica said. I can't adopt a baby. I can't love them, just the same way my parents didn't love me. It will always ring in my head that they aren't my child. I can't. I want my flesh and blood, Charles replied. And you have one coming, Veronica said. It was a mistake. Don't call that mistake. You didn't do it once or twice. You dated her for over a year. Over a whole year, Veronica said. What do I do now? Charles asked, confused. You have made your choice, obviously. I thought we could work things out. I thought you still felt something for me. But it's obvious you have made a decision faster than I imagined. Since she had the courage to come to me, I wanted her to stay with us so that I would know if you would go for her or me. But it's obvious, Veronica said. You should have told me about your inability to give birth. Charles said, I didn't want to date you in the first place. Charles, you made me fall for you. You made me fall deeply for you that I didn't want to lose you. I felt that losing you would break me down, Veronica said. This relationship was built on a lie, and anything built on lies can't stand. You made me believe I could change you. I also fell in love with you. For 7 years, Veronica, a man wants more, Charles said, and we never got to sit and talk about it. Veronica then replied, there was nothing to talk about. Charles immediately said, you started constantly drinking that I couldn't even talk to you no more. Veronica said, crying, I was thinking about my family, if they are still okay, and other things. Charles replied. There was a minute of silence in the room. A few days ago, when Sandra came into this house and told me she was pregnant for you, it broke me, Veronica said. I'm sorry, babe, Charles said. I get it. There is nothing to be sorry about. You have made your choice. I just have to move on, she replied. Everything is happening so fast. The night when I first slept with Sandra, I was drunk. But the day I met you, I was in my right senses. I still love you. I know the whole incident with Sandra is trying to pull us apart, but I still love you, Charles said. Veronica looked at Charles, who was staring at her without shaking his eyes. You don't know what you want, Charles. Let's talk about this tomorrow morning, Veronica said. I'll be sleeping in the other guest room. She left the main bedroom, but when she reached the door, she noticed that someone had been eavesdropping. She didn't know who because the person ran away immediately after she opened the door. She went to the other bedroom and slept till the following morning. The next morning, Charles woke up feeling exhausted. He had barely slept all night. The weight of his actions pressed heavily on his chest, making it difficult for him to breathe. He had told 2 women in the same house on the same day that he loved them. Now he had to face the consequences. As he sat up in the bed, he ran his hand through his hair and let out a deep sigh. His heart was troubled. He knew he had made a mess of everything. How did he let things get this bad? How could he hurt 2 women he cared about the most? There was no escaping this. Today he had to make a decision. Charles got out of bed and walked into the bathroom. He turned on the tap and splashed cold water on his face, looking at his reflection in the mirror. He barely recognized himself. His eyes were tired, his face was drawn, and there was a deep sadness in his gaze. He brushed his teeth slowly, trying to gather his thoughts. No matter what decision he made, someone would get hurt. But he had to do what was right. Meanwhile, in the guest room, Veronica sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. Her eyes were swollen from crying all night. She had always known that one day the truth would come out. She had lied to Charles before they got married, hiding the fact that she couldn't have children. She thought that her father's wealth would make up for it, but she had been wrong. Now she had lost his trust. She knew it was her fault, and she was ready to accept whatever punishment was coming. On the other hand, Sandra felt betrayed. She had overheard Charles telling Veronica that he still loved her after everything he had said to her, after making her believe that she was the only one he truly wanted. He was now telling another woman the same thing. The pain cut deep. She felt used, discarded, like a toy that had lost its value. But she wasn't going to beg him. If he didn't want her, then she would raise her child on her own. She had already made up her mind. Veronica would never take her baby away from her. The night had been long for all of them. They lay awake in their separate rooms, each lost in their own thoughts, waiting for the morning to come. When morning finally arrived, Charles gathered the courage to call the two women to the sitting room. Veronica was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard him call. She wiped her hands on a towel, took a deep breath, and walked into the living room. Sandra was already there, sitting on the couch with her arms crossed. Her eyes were cold, filled with anger and pain. Charles stood in the center of the room, his hands in his pocket, his face filled with regret. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy. He cleared his throat and spoke. "This is a tough decision for me to make," he began, his voice low and uncertain. He looked at Sandra, then at Veronica. Their expressions were unreadable. "I know I have hurt both of you in ways I cannot even begin to explain. I have been selfish, dishonest, and unfair to you both." Sandra scoffed and folded her arms, looking away. Veronica sat still, waiting for him to continue. Charles took a deep breath and turned to Sandra. "Sandra, I am truly sorry for everything. I know asking you to remove our baby was wrong. It was foolish and selfish of me. I was just scared. I didn't want to hurt my wife." Sandra's lips trembled. She had waited to hear those words, but they didn't make her feel better. They only made her pain more real. Charles continued, "I also regret leading you on. I was confused and I didn't think things through. But after thinking all night, I have made a decision. I will take responsibility for our child. But I cannot marry you. I am already married. I am already married. And despite everything that has happened, I still love my wife." A deep silence followed. Sandra's hand clenched into fist. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had been a fool to believe Charles would choose her. Veronica, who had been silent all along, finally spoke. "But I lied," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "I lied too," Charles admitted. "We all lied. But I am willing to move past our mistakes if you are." Veronica's lips quivered as tears streamed down her face. She never thought Charles would forgive her. Charles then turned back to Sandra. "You will stay with your friend Lucy in your apartment until I find another place for you. We don't need any more problems than we already have. I will come from time to time to check on you and the baby. When the baby is born, he will also be welcome in this house. He is family." Sandra felt her heart break into a million pieces. After everything, this was how it was going to end. She had been played, used, and discarded. But what choice did she have? She couldn't force Charles to love her. After everything, Sandra packed her things and moved in with Lucy, her closest friend. She spent days crying, feeling betrayed and humiliated. But Lucy was there to comfort her. "You need to be strong, Sandra," Lucy told her one evening as they sat in the small apartment. "You have a baby to think about now. Forget Charles. He has made his choice." Sandra nodded, but it wasn't easy. She still loved Charles, despite everything, but she had to let go. A few months later, Charles rented another apartment for her. It was a decent place, not too far from the hospital where she would give birth. Though he had already chosen Veronica, he still wanted to do the right thing. After things settled down, Charles and Veronica decided to visit Chief Williams, Veronica's father. They knew they had to clear the air and rebuild their relationship. When they arrived, Chief Williams was already waiting for them. He was a man of few words, but today he had something to say. I heard everything that had happened between you and my daughter, he said as soon as they sat down. And I must say, I am proud of how you handled it. Charles, many men would have walked away. Charles bowed his head in respect. Chief Williams turned to Veronica. You should have told him the truth from the start. He said firmly, lies destroy relationships, but I am glad you two are willing to move forward. I am sorry, Daddy, Veronica whispered. Chief Williams nodded and looked at Charles again. Take care of my daughter. I will, sir, Charles promised. As they drove home, Charles felt relieved. He had not lost what he had spent years building. Months later, Sandra gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Nathan. Charles and Veronica went to visit her at the hospital. When they arrived, Sandra was holding the baby in her arms, looking down at him with love. Charles approached slowly. Can I hold him? He asked softly. Sandra hesitated, then nodded. She placed the baby in his arms. Charles looked down at the tiny face and felt an overwhelming rush of emotions. This was his child, his blood, his responsibility. He looks like you, Veronica said, standing beside him. Sandra watched them carefully. It was painful, but she had to accept reality. Charles was her child's father, but he would never be hers. As time passed, Sandra focused on being a good mother. She learned to let go of the pain and move on with her life. Charles remained present in Nathan's life, visiting often and providing for him. Veronica, too, grew to accept the child and even became fond of him. But Sandra had learned a painful lesson. As a single lady, if you continue dating a married man because he promised to divorce his wife, you are taking a big risk. A man can say anything just to get what he wants. He knows why he married his wife. As the other woman, it will take the grace of God for you to break whatever he has with his wife. She had given her heart to Charles, and he had crushed it, but she had survived, and now she was stronger. Months passed, and Charles began to feel restless. The family drama with Sandra and Veronica had made him think about his own family. For years, he never spoke about his family. He told Veronica that his parents were dead, but that was not true. The truth was that Charles had left his family many years ago, and he had never looked back. He had been a stubborn child. His father was a strict man, always hard on him, always correcting him. Charles felt unloved, and one day he left and never returned. But now, something in his heart told him it was time to go back. It had been over 15 years since he last saw his family. He didn't know how they would receive him, but he had to find out. So one morning, Charles got into his car and drove to his family home in the village. He still remembered the house. The memories came rushing back as he drove through the familiar roads. When he arrived, he saw his father sitting under the big mango tree in their compound. His father looked older now, with grey hair and a tired face. As soon as Charles stepped out of the car, his father looked up. For a moment, he just stared. Then he struggled to stand up, trying to make sure his eyes were not deceiving him. Charles? His father called, his voice shaking. Charles nodded. We did not hear from you again, his father said. We thought you were dead. You never said a word. I'm here now, Charles replied. At that moment, his mother came out of the house. When she saw Charles, she gasped. Her eyes widened with shock and happiness. Charles! She screamed, running to him. She held him tightly, tears streaming down her face. Like the prodigal son in the Bible, Charles was welcomed back home. His parents took him inside, and his mother rushed to the kitchen to prepare food for him. Charles looked down the house. Everything had changed. The walls had fresh paint. The furniture looked new, and the house was beautifully decorated. His parents had really taken care of the house in his absence. As he sat down, he saw old family pictures on the wall. He saw pictures of himself as a child. And then, His eyes fell on a picture of him with his younger brother Benjamin. His mother returned with a plate of steaming hot semo and egusi soup. Charles ate while his parents watched him, happy to have him back. After he finished eating, his father looked at him. "Why did you leave without looking back?" His father asked. Charles took a deep breath. "You were too hard on me," he said. His father sighed. "You were a stubborn child," he said. "You never listened." Charles hesitated. Then he spoke again. "That was not the only reason I left," he said. "Before I ran away, I overheard you talking about adoption. I thought you were strict with me because I was not your real son. I thought you loved Benjamin more because he was your real child. That was why I left. That is why I never came back." His father looked at him with surprise. "You heard that conversation?" his father asked. Charles nodded. His father sat quietly for a moment, thinking. Then he shook his head. "That day, you made me very angry," his father said. "I was so frustrated that I said I should have adopted you instead of your younger brother." "But Charles, Benjamin was the one who was adopted, not you." Charles was shocked. His father continued. "Benjamin's parents were my best friends. They died in an accident when he was a baby. Before they died, they begged me to take care of him. You were just 2 years old when we adopted him. You were still a baby." Charles felt a deep regret in his heart. All these years, he had believed a lie. He had abandoned his family over something that was never true. "I'm sorry," Charles said after a long pause. "Where is my brother now?" "He is abroad," his mother said. "He still calls and takes care of us. He built this house for us. Even after we told him the truth, he still treats us like his real parents." Charles sighed deeply. "I was wrong," he said. "I was ignorant. But now I know better." His mother smiled. "It's all right," she said. "At least you have come back home." They talked for hours, catching up on everything they had missed. Charles felt like a heavy weight had been lifted from his heart. Before he left, he went to his car and brought out bags of rice, yams, beans, semo and other food items for his parents. He also gave them money and promised to always keep in touch. Before leaving, he collected their phone numbers and also got his brother Benjamin's contact. After spending a few days in the village, Charles returned to the city. He kept his promise to Sandra. He took care of her and the baby. But he remained with Veronica, the woman who had given him everything. Together, Charles and Veronica lived happily ever after, and Charles continued running his company as the CEO of Charles Williams' firm. The most important lesson in this story is that we should always try to understand the truth before making big decisions. Charles left his family because he thought they did not love him, but he was wrong. If he had asked questions, he would have known that his parents truly cared for him. Also, Sandra learned that not everything that looks good is real, and Lucy felt hurt because secrets can break friendships. In the end, love, kindness, and forgiveness helped everyone find happiness. This story teaches us to ask questions, be patient, and always choose love over anger. And with that, my dear friends, our story comes to a close. But remember, the magic of storytelling lives on, waiting to whisk us away on new adventures, where the wonders of imagination know no bounds. Goodbye for now, and may your dreams be filled with joy, wonder, and endless possibility. Thank you so much for watching. Please kindly comment, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting stories.